So this is a ReMA meeting and we follow the antitrust guidelines, right? Okay. So thank you for coming. I have to say that I had a different context written out for today, and it changed. It changed completely when we had a meeting yesterday. So hopefully you like it. I think it'll be interesting for you guys, and it'll be definitely a topic of conversation. But I want to start off by introducing the panel. So we have Gary Gallo, and he is from Novelis. He's been in the industry for over 40 years, started off in steel, aluminum, and he's in recycled metals. And he's going to represent in, he brings wealth of expertise and experience in the decisions that we're going to be talking about today. Daniel, he is with Ford. He is an engineer. And I know you're probably wondering why in the world is an engineer here. I will give you a reason for that in a moment, but he will be a good, he provides good prospect in the long run. And then we have Neil Byce. So Neil is with CW Metals. He's had over 15 years of experience in the recycled metals industry. I'm saying recycled metals. But he is going to be my counterpart. He is going to be your voice up here. So that should be a good conversation to have. And my name is Gabriella Vagnini. I'll be your moderator. I have to admit that when I started in this industry, I actually started off in primary aluminum. And I worked for Mitsubishi Triland. I actually started hedging for recycled metal companies. And I moved into the recycled part of the industry thinking that it was an easy move. It was a big thing, not easy. So with all that respect in mind, we're going to start our conversations. I am currently with CRU. They have a new newsletter called Aluminum Market Update, which I am heading. And I'm just happy to be a part of this. I've learned a lot about recycled metals. It is very complicated. You have to really respect what you guys do. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here again. So let's start off with the first slide. I just want to give you, again, some CRU analysis background. So if you look here, you got the recycled metals rising in the percentage of metals required in North America. And I thought this one was interesting, just again, to show you how far recycled metals has surpassed primary, or at least getting there. And it has in, looks like it'll be in 2028. You see it equaling off in 2025. So I thought this was, again, I've said it in the beginning that it's the new primary, and some people will slap me for saying that, but it is going to be very dominant in the coming future, more than typical. So right here we have the how much we would need consumption by 40% to meet the semis demand profile. And I thought this was an interesting slide to share with you guys. It's one of those that you probably want to take a picture of. Anyways, not going through all these details because we have a lot more conversation to cover instead, but I'll keep this up for a moment just to show you about the semis demand. And then the major investments in capacity expansion. So this one I thought was very interesting. When I went through how many facilities, secondaries, recycling centers, I'd say primary, but that's not an option here. In the U.S., over $10 billion invested in new aluminum facilities. I thought that was really interesting, again, to show the shift. I know everybody, the key word has been tariffs. And I know, again, primary, the issue with that, obviously, is the electricity, is the energy, which makes recycled metals all and secondary all more that valuable. So more than 2 million metric tons of new aluminum and recycled capacity is added and will be added within the next few years in North America. So with the South being the leading initiative. So moving forward, we're going to start to talk about Zorba and Twitch. Gary?
Yeah. So as I look at this slide, and thanks for putting this together, Gabrielle, I think we saw these at the Aluminum Association about a month and a half ago. I think CRU has done a really great job to frame up what the opportunity is as we look at it. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But there's one line right in the middle of this slide that I think it's almost the lead that's buried. And it basically says that there's going to be a significant increase in the amount of wrought aluminum in Twitch as we go forward, particularly as a result of the F-150s that are coming back into the marketplace. But what it also says is that a lot of that material is going to be mixed. And mixed aluminum, even if it's wrought aluminum that's mixed, makes it challenging for consumers like Novelis, producers like Novelis, to use that in the most fully circularized and optimized way. And what it points to is the need for segregation. And this is a path that Novelis started about 5 years ago in earnest, realizing that because of the slides that you've just seen, there's a significant increase in the amount of aluminum manufacturing, both globally and in the United States. Every one of the aluminum plants that's been announced, whether it's ours, ADI's, Hydro's, all have recycled content, aluminum scrap at the center. All those plants are designed to be able to consume scrap. There's only so much of it out there. So for Novelis, we look at this thing called Twitch as the prize in the middle of the room. It's currently downcycled. There's wrought and cast together, and that goes into a product called 380. So for those of you who think that that Twitch is a funny name, just a quick story. A couple of months ago, in our offices in Detroit, we gave a presentation to an automotive OEM, and we were talking about Twitch, and I had a small collection of Twitch out on the table, and the label underneath it said "End of Life Twitch." And after that, our IT colleague came up to me and he said, "Gary, I was so glad to hear you explain what this is." I said, "Well, I appreciate that. Well, what was unique about it?" And he said, "I just had this mental image in my head about the last thing you do before they declare you dead, you know?" And I said, "Okay, funny. That's not what end of life Twitch is, but it reinforces the need to define this." So recognizing that there is a diverse audience, just to be sure that we're on the same page. When we're talking about Twitch, Twitch is the aluminum fraction of scrap that comes as the result of shredding, whether it's a appliance, a car, a piece of machinery. It's the cast fraction and it's the aluminum fraction together. I'll end with this. The most important part about that discussion is that while that currently is all recycled, it all goes into secondary alloys. They all go into secondary cast, for the most part, alloys. Once you take a hood from an F-150 and you shred it and you send it away to make, say, A380 out of it, we can never get that scrap back. The silicon content goes through the roof. Silicon's a killer for the raw producers, and we lose it forever. It's a resource that then is downcycled or undercycled for our use. And that's really the primary driver for the discussion that we're having. We look at Twitch. It is the opportunity for us to feed the scrap demand that we've got moving forward with the raw material that's contained in Twitch today, trying to upcycle that, mine it out, and use that as an in-feed. And we'll talk some more about that.
Okay. Right. So you want to talk through the slide then?
Yeah. So at a high level, as Novelis has looked at this as the opportunity, we look at kind of a three-phased roadmap to be able to separate the wrought from the cast. And this is where the conversations that we've had with all the exhibitors who were here on the floor over the last couple of days have been focused on the technology to allow cast and wrought separation. Up until fairly recently, you wouldn't think that would have been a big challenge, but it's not something that technology providers were looking to provide a solution for. And the reason they weren't looking to provide a solution for it, because there wasn't a demand. People like Novelis and other wrought producers were not saying, "Bring your Twitch, I want it." We didn't want it. There's enough scrap in the market. Times have changed. We need that scrap, but the only way we can use it is if the wrought and the cast are separated. So for us, step one in this roadmap is taking the wrought fraction and just separating it from the twitch. And there's a couple of different ways from a technology standpoint to do that. Artificial intelligence is one, XRT is another, LIDS is another, but it's a journey. We're at the very beginning of that discussion today. And thankfully, some of the technology providers that you see up there, whether it's Sortera, Steiner, Tomra, Bender, SGM, all those folks are engaged in trying to find this solution, for the market. And I say the market, and I'll close with this because it's not just Novelis that's looking for this material. Every wrought producer is also trying to do the same thing that we are globally. We've just put a concerted effort to try to develop this technology to get it first from the wrought cast fraction, and then in the second and third phases of this, you'll see we break it out into alloy classes, and then ultimately into the 4-digit alloy code. Different technologies to get us to that path, but the first path, so the first step that we're on today, is trying to differentiate cast and wrought.
And that leads us into Vesper. So let's have that conversation. So Vesper is a new spec that you guys are working on, correct? It's not visible to anybody yet.
It's live. We're all set.
Is it live? I can find it online.
It passed this past week through our governance meetings, and Vesper is a real thing.
Okay, perfect. Well,
Salute.
Exactly. So besides it being the Latin meaning, evening star and a James Bond casino Bond girl, Vesper is something that you're thinking that is needed, recycler-wise. Why would they invest in it for them? Is it worth it? I mean, we can get into pricing on that aspect, and I know.
Let me take this to start with. So, the wonderful thing about the ReMA specs is they are for recyclers. They're created by recyclers to aid in the sale and purchase of the commodities that we sell between buyer and seller. So it was a collaboration between industry and recyclers to come up with this spec. There are 100 other specs out there that for different products that we all trade in. Vesper is the newest one, and it is probably the most interesting that we've done because it's so cutting edge. And what else is interesting is that it's one of the first moments that marks this true collaboration between folks like Ford and Novelis and recyclers all coming together to try to create something that is workable. And we even included those that are manufacturing the equipment out on the show floor. They were part of this conversation to ensure that what it is that we are specifying, they can create and make.
Okay. It's kind of like MLC, so it is a bit different in that aspect. Now, why, again, was this created differently than MLC, so you can kind of tell the audience?
Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah. So two things. Let me back up for just a second and express my gratitude to ReMA for working with us to move this spec forward in a preemptive way. A lot of the ReMA specs are specs that are based on commodities that are already traded. And in this case, we work together to create a spec for a commodity that is just starting its life, and our hope is that it enables the market to be developed for the industry, taking this wrought fraction out, giving it its own name, and legitimizing it allows the market to be created around it. And to your question, why is it important? How is it, from a recycler standpoint? We recognize that because it is in the development stage, this is step one, trying to get the cast and the wrought separated. And scrap processors are what we found, particularly I'll tell you in the last 6 months, the response has been phenomenal of interest by scrap processors to invest in the technology that's out on the show floor to be able to get to that first level of a cast wrought split. For Novelis's part, trying to provide the wrought fraction feeds Ford and feeds the product that we're making for Ford, and it helps Ford to accomplish something that's really important for them.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Okay, so going through the slides though, right here, if you want to talk through. Look at me. I'm just flipping through slides. That's all I'm doing here. Go ahead.
We're rolling with it. We're rolling with it.
There's like, 15 slides. So we'll go through.
Yeah, when we said this was going to be kind of an impromptu, we weren't following a script. We're definitely not following a script. And this is good, right?
I know.
I don't want this conversation to be strictly a Novelis conversation. I don't mean to be speaking for the Aluminum Association. I don't mean to be speaking for my compatriots in the scrap processing world, in the consuming world.
With that being said, though, there was, what was it, the Green Sword Initiative in China?
Mm-hmm.
Remember that one? And people were like, why should we get on board? Right. Is it really worth it for us? So how is this different than that? How is it worth it for them?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. The first one would be, ideally what we hope is going to occur, and in fact it already is occurring because Novelis is already buying this product. We believe that the demand for Vesper will be created when companies like Novelis go out to the market and issue purchase orders and a spec to all of you and say, this is what we want. Here's how we're going to price it. Here's what the spec looks like. If you make it and we meet the spec, then we can consume it, provide that material to Ford. We also hope that this will provide another market opportunity for Zorba to be consumed, in the United States, or we believe this will be global. So it opens the door for another market opportunity for scrap processors to market Zorba and to create Twitch. Mm-hmm. You asked a question before, Gabriella, about why is this spec different from Twitch? Very intentionally working with ReMA, this spec specifically calls out pulling the Twitch fraction from Zorba. And so we tried to focus this by saying we know that Twitch traditionally contained in Zorba has been downcycled into secondary cast alloys. And we wanted to focus the attention on drawing Twitch out of that, which is to say that what we don't want to do is take dealer sheet taint paper extrusion packages that are already being recycled and dump them into a Vesper product. Now, there's got to be a couple people in the room smirking at this, right? Because, there's no way that Novelis is going to put a whole bunch of forensic metallurgists, in a scrap pile and start picking out the stuff that was part of taint paper and part of extrusion. We recognize that the markets are efficient. There's going to be times when taint paper and extrusion packages are going to wind up in Twitch. It's just going to happen. That's not what we'd like, but we are the ones who have to create the pricing mechanism that keeps the differential there. If we price our 3X product, our dealer sheet packages at a premium, you'll keep that material flowing our way in that form. If it becomes part of Twitch, that's the industry's fault for pricing it out that way.
Yeah. And what I want to lead off to from there is Ford's piece in all of this. So what I mentioned before is why we have an engineer up here. So when I was trading, I went to an automotive engineers conference, which was a bit boring, but I will say it was interesting because it's the start. It's the start of everything to see what they're doing, what they're thinking, and how it gets from them to you. So with that in mind, let's walk through this whole discussion right here.
Sure. So, Ford Motor Company, we switched in 2014, it's the steel body F-150, went to an aluminum body F-150. And what followed after that, thank you, at the slide. So, we make several aluminum intensive vehicles. And when I say aluminum intensive, that just means these are all body on frame vehicles. So the body is made from aluminum. It sits on top of a steel frame. Key reason for doing that was to, increase fuel economy. And then on the F-150, it also increased capability. So reduce or take weight out of the body. You can beef up the frame and increase towing capacity, hauling capability. So, it's great for the customer. And what I'm showing here is, this is a F-150 body structure, and it's, representative of the other vehicles that we make. They're basically all the same platform. So it's F-150, Navigator, or the Navigator and Expedition all kind of share this. So to build these, we use five different grades of aluminum that are engineered, to meet certain performance metrics, and we'll kind of cycle through these. So if you go to the next slide, so the 6CH and 5HF, and you can tell these are very clever names here. So 6CH just stands for 6000 series extra Hemi, and it's based off of maybe some alloys that you have seen in the past, 6222, 6005. The 5HF is used to make the door inner panels, and it has really good formability. It can make those deep sections. 5ST is another 5000 series, and then we have the 6DR and another one, so 6000 series. D is dent, R is resistance, dent resistance.
Can you tell I'm going fast through this?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Right. And then we'll get to this, and we have the high strength 6, which is in red. But anyways, okay. So there's these 5 grades here, and the key thing is they fit into 4 recycling streams. So at our stamping plants, these metals are collected into 4 bins in a closed loop recycling system. So maybe we want to.
Okay, let's circle back to that last word, because I think half of the people will probably walk out when you said closed loop.
Okay. Yeah.
So how can we relate it to the audience and make it palatable in that term? Because when we spoke yesterday and you mentioned closed loop, it actually involves the audience and the recyclers.
Right.
How has it changed? How does it now involve them?
Right. So the closed loop, like I said, there's we segregate the scrap into 4 streams. And if you go all the way back to that first slide with the bar chart there. So
one back there. There you go.
Yeah. And then if you look here, so every coil that comes into our stamping plant, starts out as an ingot. And this slide, very simple, shows, 3 different scenarios of what could go into that ingot. One, it could be all primary aluminum, mined, smelted. The common, what it is today is basically about roughly 30%, could be 40%, closed loop recycling scrap that comes from our plant, goes, back to the mills, and then the rest would be primary. What we'd like to do, and this is really driven by trying to reduce the carbon footprint, of the vehicle, of the stamp component. And in our view, the only way to do this is to incorporate an outside scrap stream being the end of life, which could be, Vesper product or sorted twitch. And yeah, so Gary, maybe you have a few words on the
I
closed
think
loop definition.
Yeah, it's I think what's important about for Novelis, the importance of closed loop is in many ways all of you. I think about I was hired at Novelis 11 years ago to manage the program that Dan was referring to. The vast majority of the scrap that's generated at Ford's stamping plants comes back to either Novelis or Arconic as suppliers by contract in the form of these little ribbons of compass type scrap, right? Ford did that because they knew that if they were to introduce all that scrap into the market in an ad hoc basis, it'd collapse the market. So they contractually said to both of us as suppliers.
Maybe one more point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Could not fund the F-150 project without, doing that, the scrap to have that extra efficiency. So
yeah. But I think what's important in that conversation is even though a lot of the scrap that comes out of Ford stamping plants does go directly back to Arconic or to Novelis, a significant amount of other scrap from tier stampers or even generated at the plants does work or find its way intentionally through scrap processors to prepare and return to Novelis. And I think about like the very first call, the very first task that I was given at Novelis on the F-150 program was in Detroit to reach out and find someone who could help us to manage that program. And the first call that we made was to Ferris Processing. and Tony Levin and Rob Bakodich, Mario, that team 11 years ago helped us to create a program where this non-compass scrap went and got shredded and brought back to Novelis. That program is still in place today, and the program wouldn't work unless there was that partnership with the scrap processor to enable that. And every other OEM that we sell to, that we have a closed loop program with, works through and because of the relationship with the scrap processor. So it's absolutely critical, and it's always been critical for the scrap industry to partner with you to make this thing happen.
I have to say, Neil, I'm very surprised. You're really quiet right now. So I know there's a lot of thoughts
Look,
out
I'm
there.
sure the hair on the back of people's necks are standing up just a little bit. I mean, if you went to the copper spotlight, if you've been around the industry lately, I mean, there's all kinds of language about closed loop, about export controls. I mean, it's an endless conversation about these sort of existential threats that we face as recyclers as to what does our future look like? How are we included in this mix? And, what makes that scary is the uncertainty and the fact that someone may be dictating that to you, right? And that it's not inclusive and it doesn't feel collaborative. I think that, my conversations with the both of you is that's not the feeling I get, right? That there is this genuine desire to be collaborative. But it is difficult to sort of transform the paradigm that exists and the fear that we have as recyclers, because we have scars, we have old battle wounds that we still we're mending from. So I hear you, and what I think is great is this Vesper may be a great example of sort of some of that relationship building and that collaboration, and it's the leading with your feet, not your mouth. So I can appreciate that. Yeah.
So you feel like you're part of the conversation now?
At least for now, right? I mean, I think that there are things still remain that are out there. I mean, you guys are trying to increase production by 900 tons a year or something, and
900,000 tons.
900,000 tons a year, and that's a huge number. And we are fearful of where you're going to get that.
Sure.
If you're counting on the recycling stream to do that, without this rot package, it doesn't exist. And so we as recyclers, I guess, need to accept the fact that this is an important thing to the industry, that we'll be compensated to do it, and it'll be fruitful for everyone.
I think the really important connecting point here is that closed loop, when we originally did the closed loop program with Ford, that was focused on this idea that it was new production metal, right? We make the coil, we ship the coil to Ford, stamps the scrap, and it comes right back to us. That's one little piece of closed loop. The Vesper example, to me, is a much better example of truly where closed loop happens, because all of you are helping Dan and I close the loop. When you bring in aluminum intensive anything, whether it's an appliance or a car, those of you who run shredders, when you shred that, you're achieving the link in the closed loop that's essential, right? It's always been essential. I would say that, I don't know what, Brandon, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but for our North American team, the vast majority of the metal that Novelis purchases from the industry comes through all of you, and you're closing the loop to do that. We're not in the business. We're not good at it, and we don't want to be in it.
So you're saying now that you are going to bring the recyclers to the table, right? I mean, that's probably, this isn't a one-trick pony. This isn't something, obviously, because of the tariffs. Primary aluminum is too expensive, so now they're looking at, obviously recycled metals, which is already short in demand a little bit. So just want to make sure that this is something that'll be new and consistent, and they'll have that conversation.
So I would flip the script back on that a little bit, and with all due respect, I understand, Neil, where you're coming from, because I heard that when we started the closed loop program, there are battle scars, from that. But all of the scrap that Novelis purchases comes from the scrap industry. We've always viewed the scrap industry as being at the table, right? You've got to be at the table with us. Otherwise, we will never, whether it's Novelis or ADI or, Hydro, Constellium, Arconic, all of you are critical, to that process. And so from Novelis' standpoint, as the largest buyer of scrap, we've always considered that relationship with the scrap industry as being critical. Have we screwed it up at times? Damn straight, right? No doubt. Is our intention to, fix what we've done wrong? Sure.
I think another thing recyclers are fearful of is some of the consolidations that we're seeing in the industry is related to people buying scrap companies and making new businesses out of them, right? So, from your perspective and Dan, yours, where do you see recyclers in this role over the next 10 years as consolidations continue to happen? What's your role in that?
Is Novelis even looking to get into it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
You want to tell them that we partnered together to buy a scrap company? Ford and Novelis.
Yeah, this is the big release.
Fake news, huh?
Yeah.
Right.
It wasn't CW Metals.
Yeah, Ford has gone down that path and it failed. So we've been there, done that, and it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say from Novelis' standpoint, our capital allocation model is focused on taking these two beasts of plants that we've got in North America, Bay Minette and Guthrie, Kentucky. The capital that we have has been focused on building those facilities, making them run as effectively as they can, and enabling them to consume as much scrap as they can. Right? That's really critical for us. To Novelis, putting the money into that part of the business is critical. And what that means, I think, is that the more scrap we consume, the more market opportunity there is for everybody in this room, right? That's the connection point.
So just to be clear, you're not going to buy any scrap yards or recycle.
Look, by 5 o'clock today,
Thank you.
West Coast time, we will not have purchased a scrap yard.
That's commitment.
And maybe by even a Friday, we'll go long on that one. No, in all seriousness, I don't think, when Novelis has looked at that, and I think, look, you guys know this business. Imagine a funnel. The vast majority of metal that you handle, it sticks to a magnet, right? Steel doesn't do anything for us. Our CFO is not going to go out and say, hey, buy a scrap yard and we'll figure out what to do with 90% of the product. And we'll broker that and it doesn't work right now. Obviously there's a piece of the metal that we do need. We need the wrought fraction. And we're trying to partner even more with scrap processors to get there.
Recycling.
I'm sorry?
Recycling processors.
Yes, recycling.
I had to put a quarter in the jar every time I said scrap, so I'm correcting you right now. So let's just move on a little bit forward here.
Maybe we can touch on that, just to comment on, or the one before, sorry. So here, like our specs today are ready to accept, that initial wrought fraction. Maybe not 50% of the ingot, but 5-10%, could absorb that wrought fraction. And then, in the future, if it could be sorted to 5 and 6 and even to our 4 specific streams, we could readily, consume those into our existing specs. And any future specs will kind of have this system or future specs will be designed around receiving recycled metal. So, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, and the connection to that to Vesper is, the gentleman that I work for is a Colorado School of Mines metallurgist, and he loves to use the analogy of the Statue of Liberty. And he says, if you look at the wrought fraction of Twitch, Vesper, you take the cast away, what you coincidentally wind up with is a metallurgical composition that looks a lot like the kind of scrap that we buy into 3104 or 3105. Mm-hmm. It's just happened. It works out that way, right? And so the analogy that he likes to make about the Statue of Liberty is, 3104 and 3105 is this alloy that can be made out of just about anything. Bring us your huddled masses, right? We'll take it. So that's where Vespa fits in, to the conversation. So what Dan's referring to here, again, going back to the slide of the first step to alloy segregation. Once you've got the wrought fraction out, we can use that obviously in the 3104, 3105, but that's not the highest and best use for the scrap. Where we want to put it is into these alloys to make high value products, for customers like Ford. We can put a little bit of just the Vesper product into these existing grades, 2, 3, 4, 5%, whatever that happens to be. That's great. But in the next step, if we can separate the 3s, 5s, and 6s, or the 5182 from the 6111, we get into then being able to go alloy to alloy, and that metal becomes that much more valuable.
And that's why I wanted to concentrate on this and why I shifted the context of what we're going to talk about. We didn't want this to be an ad and just talking about something, but when I heard about Vesper yesterday, a lot of people that I spoke to haven't quite heard much about it. And I thought it was the innovation. It's the initiative. It's what's going to start the change and the drive, again, to bring, recycled metals to the table going forward. So
hands down.
Yeah. Neil, did you want to add anything? Just skipping through everything for you?
No. I think what I would add is one of the questions we talked about was whether recyclers can meet the spec.
Yeah.
And I think that there are some very unique challenges. Not all twitch is created equal. The cast fraction is your challenge in all of this, and sorting out that cast, depending on the levels of cast in the twitch, that material is difficult to pull out, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the big challenge here. I think patience, being a partner with the industry. This is new to everyone, right? Yeah. And everyone needs a big dose of patience in this. Yeah. So as we invest tens of millions of dollars to do these facilities, to produce these materials for you all, please bear with us as we do it, right? And
yeah, we're there. So who was around for Jesse Cole's presentation? Really? You guys missed a great presentation. Go, when ReMA posted, go get it. It was great. The Banana Man, right? He talked about 3 E's. One of the E's, I think the last E, was experimentation. So to Neil's point, and back to the learning curve part of Vesper being a developmental, this is in many ways aspirational. We're trying to get here. We're working with all of the equipment providers to encourage the development of the technology to make the thing that we want, the industry needs in a low silicon product. We know it's going to take some experimentation to get there. So we're working with a small group of scrap suppliers, recyclers, to help us to develop that. And that's where we see the opportunity to be able to get there. But it's definitely a learning curve discussion. We think it's, like a 3 to 5 years, but there are an incredible number of people who are already saying, we want to play in this market. The first movers, the first adopters are saying, yeah, we kind of see where this is going. And if you, Novelis, and your compadres in the flat roll business and in the wrought business, if you're purchasing metal, we're willing to make the investment.
Yeah, the sortation is endless.
It really is.
Yeah. With that said, Neil did say something to me yesterday that I thought was very interesting and was a key phrase in the recycled industry, right? If you're not sitting at the table, you're on the menu. So you don't feel like now that you're on the menu, you feel like there's a seat at the table for the recycled industry.
Well, I've had the pleasure of being around the two of these folks for the last 2 days, so it's been easy for me, but I encourage the rest of you, obviously, do the same thing. Get involved. Yeah. Pick up the phone. Call one of these suppliers or these consumers that are looking for these products. Figure out what it is that you need to do. Partner with your equipment manufacturers. Find your path.
Very well said. With that said, though, I know, again, this is something new to a lot of people, so we want to open up the floor to any questions. There are microphones, I think 2 of them over there. If anybody has any questions for...
All right. Great session, by the way. My only fear about Vespers is when I go to a bar in the future, I order one, they're going to come up with a glass of recycled aluminum. Not what I want to order.
You could be so lucky.
All right. The question is, though, for Mr. Gallo, on the Ford engineering, on the grades of all these different aluminums, how much more aluminum besides the F-150 is going to be in the U.S. automotive industry, in the near future, or call it 5-10 years? How much more components, how much different models of automobiles will have more recycled aluminum content in it?
That's a good point, because right now it's only Dearborn that I know of that has a recycled. Do you have it in your other facilities as well?
The stamping scrap recycling?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's in Dearborn stamping plant, Kentucky truck, and Buffalo stamping plant.
Mhm.
But I think the question was around, are we going to keep using aluminum in the vehicles? And yeah, I can't talk about the future, but I mean, you can look at the growth of aluminum, the first slide you shared, Gabriella, and then just from, the automotive design space, lightweighting is a big goal, and it's really an expression of, just efficient design. And, that's making a car is a, optimization of cost and performance. And like take high strength aluminum, for example, that's an option for lightweighting. So is advanced high strength steels. And, what is the best combination of cost and performance?
Mm-hmm.
So somewhat of a non-answer, but gives you some context of why it's so challenging to predict,
I would say so. Yeah, Dan's in a bit of an awkward spot, right? He's not going to announce that, the next vehicle platform that's going into aluminum, right? But here's what I would say from Novelis' standpoint. And if you took Novelis out of the equation and you just looked at the slide that Gabriella's got up here, that growth is driven by two major value streams within, at least within the North American flat roll business. One of them is this thing, right? Tremendous amount of interest on the part of beverage packagers to move away from plastic into aluminum. So the growth of the plants that we've got and the growth in the sales that we're anticipating, largely coming from UBC. The other part is automotive. So Ford made the most important move in the automotive industry by making the F-150 out of aluminum. Others have followed, and our projection is that that's going to continue to follow, because regardless of what happens to CAFE standards, fuel efficiency is going to be important. Lightweighting is going to be important. So our growth curve is heavily into automotive. So now that's, the good news is. The bad news is, an F-150 is going to be on the road for 15 years.
Yeah.
So it's going to be part of living inventory for a heck of a long time before you get it back.
Next question.
Hi, guys. Chad Kripke from Kripke Enterprises. This panel was awesome, and I think having Ford here, it was really an accomplishment. I think, we've had plenty of the Novelis people on stage before, and we hear one end of it, but to hear, and not to downplay Gary, but to have you here, because this was so transformative to this part of the industry, and it's growing, and I think it was interesting to hear it from your standpoint. And Neil, I think it was great that you addressed kind of the elephant in the room for everybody else here.
A couple of them anyways.
Yeah, a couple of them. So, I mean, to an aluminum geek like me, it was like watching the Jerry Springer show. I was like,
I know. You should have seen him yesterday.
My question is the one thing that kind of didn't get addressed, and, is the poor secondary smelters. So like the secondary smelters are always just kind of getting pushed around, and, if enough of this wrought is mined out of Twitch or any other products that we decide to mine to feed, the shortage.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, they don't necessarily want those alloys, but that's missing tonnage. And have you thought at all about what the impact is going to be to the secondary industry and how they're going to make up for that?
Sure. No, it's a really fair question. I don't know if Mary Helpus is here with Imperial, but when we first rolled this discussion out in earnest at the fly-in in February, we had some really great conversations about what the impact would be to secondaries. To specifically answer that, what we've done as part of the road mapping is we're trying to get to a point of collaborative disruption with the secondaries to say, look, we know it's going to be a change in your business, and it's going to leave you with a product that looks different than what you've seen before. The mix is going to be different. The bill of materials is going to be different. The feedback that we've gotten from a lot of secondaries is feedback that's very similar to the way we look at the metallurgical composition of the scrap that we consume. Like alloys to like alloys are easier to recycle. So if what is the result of this to the secondary market is that the cast product that is formed or created are 380, 356, 319, those alloys hopefully would go into a more circular, more cost efficient product, right? And there are scrap processors who are, Sortera is one of them, who is trying to separate those into their constituent parts to make just a 380 or just a 356 package. Is it going to be disruptive? Yeah, it is. The feedback that we're getting though is that lower chlorine costs, lower operating costs, change management. You've got to deal with all those things, but people see a path there.
Plus, you're creating an alternative to the export market, so
Yeah.
it isn't as disruptive as potentiality could be.
Yeah.
Next question.
Okay. Thank you guys for being here. And like what Chad said, it's really helpful to see it all tied together with what alloys are going where and, in the truck itself. It's really helpful. So thank you for that. My question is, if this is so important that we sort and, like the recycling industry gets better at, creating higher quality packages, like Vesper, things like that. What is ReMA doing, or can you elaborate on other resources besides circulars, or is there trainings or visual aids or other resources that ReMA is developing so that the guys on the ground doing the sorting, can get better at what they're doing? Thank you again.
It's a great question.
It is a great question, and I don't necessarily represent ReMA's educational content, so I don't have a great answer for you. I think that as these marketplaces grow, we certainly will provide content to the members, provide some guidance on what these products should look like, connect people together, and that is one of the focus items of what the trade association does do.
So the only thing I would add to that, I think the spec Vesper, the last line in that spec in most ReMA specs have details to be ironed out between buyer and seller. So what Novelis will come to the market with here in relatively short order is a specification for what our desired product looks like. And it will have a chemical specification to it, which we don't typically see in a ReMA spec. There's a compositional analysis on the spec, but there's not an analytical necessarily in there. So we'll come to the market with that, and hopefully with that provides some clarity as to what level of silicon or free cast or free zinc or whatever, is going to be, to our desire. That said, I would also say back to the development side of the thing, we need to figure out how this is going to work. And we think based on the feedback that it's positive, but we're looking for feedback from all of you, as we go.
Yeah, and additionally, as members, send feedback to the trade association. We're there to supply you folks with the information and the desires that you have. So whatever you need, let us know.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. My name's Andrew from Grupo Alexander in Laredo, Texas. We have supported the import market, primarily scrap UBCs for the last 13 years, and we've definitely seen a shift in the desire for more transparency. And I wanted to ask you guys today, how do you see the Mexican market playing out in the future of all of your businesses, if at all? Does it have a seat at the table, and how do you see this transparency component being a part of that?
That's a loaded question.
How much time do we have?
Yeah, exactly. Do you guys want to answer that?
I can take a stab at it from the scrap side. Yeah. So I guess as I think about that, there's a lot of material that moves cross border. I know that our North American team looks at things like scrap swaps, so that we try to get UBC back. We UBC in Mexico, we don't want it to go into a secondary product, right? We'd prefer that for the same reason. It's not part of the spec, but we'd like to get UBC back into and stay in a raw product. So I think the answer to that question from my perspective is it's going to be market driven. If the price premium for any wrought product is sufficient, it'll stay a wrought product. When the market's inverted and secondary becomes the preferred option for it, that's where it's going to go. I think what Novelis's position is that we're not going to interfere in the trade of metal for which there is a market. So if it makes more sense for it to go somewhere else in a given period of time, that's where it's going to go. There's not much we can do to fix that, other than make sure that the pricing supports the desired outcomes that we've got. I don't know if that's thoroughly helpful. Did you?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Alfredo Tinoco, Kaiser Aluminum. Excellent presentation. You touched briefly on this at the beginning of the presentation when discussing the concept of closed loop and recycled content in the products. I was wondering if the definition and the firming up of those terms was still being worked on, if ReMA had any involvement, and how those terms are not necessarily interchangeable. Maybe you can achieve recycled content, not necessarily through closed loop.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So what is recycled content means a lot of different things, and there's some folks who are moving towards mandating some recycled content. I think the position within, speaking on behalf of Ford, is that don't really we don't really consider recycled content, but we look at instead carbon intensity. So that's a more encompassing term, and would enable that would encompass multiple recycling streams, so closed loop, and then the end of life sorted.
Mm-hmm.
And so one number.
Yeah.
And then reducing primary, increasing recycled content will reduce the carbon intensity. Mm-hmm. So
I want to make sure that I understood your question on the definition. So you said something before the closed loop piece that is ReMA quarter. Was you were trying to differentiate between closed loop and something?
Recycled content. And whether ReMA was being a part of that discussion, because you can achieve recycled content without necessarily going into closed loop.
Correct.
And you can even sell industrial scrap and not go closed loop and still be achieving recycled content.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. One of the things that we've actually joked with Ford, not joked with, but I mean, it's the conversations that we've had, in the future, when we talk about recycled content, sometimes we think of the nutrition label, on the back of a box of Fruit Loops, right? And part of that nutrition label would say, okay, here's how much prime we had. And of that prime, this is what was ultra low carbon. This is what was carbon based. And right to Dan's point, you start to build up the carbon intensity. But then you've got production scrap, new production scrap that could be closed loop, or it could be third party scrap that we purchase from all of you. It could be end of life, material from Vespa, that comes back. And companies like Ford want to see this kind of bill of materials for the compositional analysis of the recycled content of the product that they're creating, that we're providing to them, so that they can get this carbon intensity, map for the product. It's very much still developmental because of the accounting requirements, for us to be able to certify that this is what it is. But I think when I think of closed loop, to your question, it's one part of recycled content, but there's 4 or 5 other pieces to that as well.
Thanks.
Sure.
Next question.
So Gary, Dan, thanks again for coming. 15 years ago, none of us saw 6111, 6022, 5754 in our scrap stream. It would have been really helpful if we had been given a heads up that it was coming. It would have been better for you, Gary, because we would have been able to collect it. You would have been able to get better value, along with all the other consumers. have these ones that you've showed up there, have they won? Is this all that we can expect going forward? Or are we currently, everyone likes to say, we can't talk about ours. It's proprietary.
Right.
We call it this. We call it that. It's all the same. So, what should we be looking out for? And now that you're collaborating with us on this new spec, would you also make a commitment to collaborate with us here and let us know what is coming next?
I think that's a great question.
It is a great
Yeah.
question. Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
I think that, I'll let them answer, obviously, but I have to tell you about my experience throughout this. So, I've challenged them throughout the last 3 weeks that we've been talking to each other, a month or so, and I think they've recognized, and other consumers have recognized, that the top-down approach doesn't work anymore, and it has to be a bottom-up approach. So to your point, Matt, we are the base level as the collectors of this material, and the person and the people ultimately responsible for getting it back into the circle. They've recognized our importance in that role. And I think that while it's new, it's developing, the collaboration and the desire between the parties seems to be very genuine. So I think that answers part of it, but I'd like to hear their answer as well.
Yeah, going into, what will there be, new alloys in the space, and, kind of to step back. So what we have on the screen right here, and I showed those composition slides with the big boxes, and those are from our Ford material specs. So there's Novelis, Arconic, Constellium can all make these grades, and then they're might have a much narrower box within those boxes. And then in the future, at least, I'm like 6111, at least Ford, I think Ford's probably the biggest user of 6111. And, we want to make that higher strength. So what is that doing? We're just adding maybe a little more magnesium, silicon, copper, but it's going to be in that same alloy family. And then same with the others. So like the low copper, and the 5000 series. So they'll all basically stay within that, those families. One thing that might come into play, which would be, I guess radically different for us, but for you guys probably wouldn't matter too much, would be the introduction of like there's this 6016 alloy out there, which is a little more silicon, and that may come into play. I know a lot of other OEMs use that, but even that 6016, the silicon is still low enough where it could probably fit into, this Vesper spec. So yeah, hopefully that answered it from the alloy side. If anything to add.
Yeah, no, I think certainly
or maybe one more.
Go for it.
So, and as far as the collaboration, I mean, a good example, we had a really nice project. It was led by the University of Michigan through the ReMA Institute, called the Clean Sheet Project. But so Novelis was a part of it, Ford, ISRI at the time, now ReMA. And the big piece of that was, collecting a bunch of full-sized F-150s, putting them through a shredder and seeing what came out from the other end. And, one conclusion, might be obvious. The twitch, the silicon content is too high to use directly into new aluminum. And different sorting methods were modeled, and it, for sure indicated things like LIBS, XRT sorting is absolutely necessary to, one, split the cast and the wrought, and then of course wrought into the other series. So,
Matt, I would say that the one other buzzword that has been floating around in the automotive space, and certainly in the flat rolled R&D space, product development, is kind of a uni-alloy sort of thing, right? So we're trying to do the same thing with a beverage can. So instead of a 5182 top, so the top of this can is essentially the same alloy that Dan showed up there. It's 5182. The 3104 is the bottom piece of it. Like in the can and in the auto space, I think would all be better served if there were less alloys than more. Originally, when, Ford came up with the 5 alloys, they were, as Dan had in the previous slide, they were all very specific to a structural need or a performing need, on the vehicle. So I think even Ford would like to be able to draw down the number of alloys that it uses, but certainly the automotive industry does. And in Europe, for those of you from Europe, you're probably familiar with the fact that there's really only two alloys in Europe that are predominant in automotive manufacturing. It's 5182 and some variant of a low copper scrap. And for that reason, segregation becomes significantly easier.
Before you take another question, just to add to Matt's point, recyclers are increasingly under pressure, both regulatory and legislatively. Our lexicon change and our name change, the recycled materials industry counts on you folks. We make products for you. We supply you those raw materials that enables you. We could use your help. We could use your help at our state houses, at the capitals. We face such mounting challenges these days in our ability to keep our businesses running that you help tell that story. Yeah. So we'd love that commitment from you as well, as that you'll be the
I think I can safely say that the message has been received.
Sorry, David.
No, but it's look, it's a fair question. You know as well that we have legislative affairs folks that work with ReMA almost down another quarter, and on a state level we're as engaged where we have producing plants, to be legislatively involved. And maybe the opportunity there is
you wield way more influence than we ever could as an industry. So
message heard.
Without your help, we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Okay. David Wallace from Huron Valley Steel. First of all, Neil, thank you for what you just said. My question is for Dan. How much of the stampings, the production scrap that Ford is using, is being segregated? You were just starting to touch on segregation. Is being segregated at the production level. My understanding was that at the first plant, there was an effort at segregation, but is Ford maintaining that throughout? And is that their goal? And my other question is this: when you talk about carbon intensity as opposed to recycled content, could you explain for us the role of stampings, the industrial scrap versus the post-consumer scrap, the end-of-life scrap, and how that carbon intensity is calculated and what the role of each type of scrap is in that calculation?
Oh, sure. Thank you. So on the first part there, so again, closed loop was introduced at Dearborn Stamping Plant, 4 streams, and to give you some context, about 40% of the coil ends up as scrap, and that's pretty typical. If you look at a part that's pretty on par, imagine like an L-shaped part, coming from a square coil, you're going to have some scrap. And then we have there's another sorting stream at Buffalo Stamping Plant and Kentucky Truck Plant. And then going forward, will there be new streams? So, for us to, put up a stream, it has to make sense from a business case. So, for example, if, we have a new plant and now the alloy mix or at that particular stamping plant is only, the high copper, it doesn't make sense to have four streams there. So there may be none or 2. There may be a low copper and high copper. But again, that the recyclability of those grades will remain. And then to your, about the carbon intensity piece. So, the way Ford views it, and so carbon intensity, it's really a allocation, we'll call it. It's an accounting framework, and the way Ford looks at it. So if we worry about the carbon intensity that ends up on a stamped part. Okay. So we start there and work backwards. What goes into that? So it's made from a coil. how's a coil made? It starts with an ingot that has some percentage of primary aluminum. So primary aluminum is the biggest driver for the carbon intensity, just because it requires a huge amount of electricity. Depending where you are in the world, it could be as high as 14, or across our border it could be around 4. And these numbers I'm speaking of is tons of CO2 per tons of aluminum. And then so I guess how we count the carbon intensity is set up in kind of borders, if you will. So if we take Novelis, for example, they make the ingot, they make the coil, and they ship the coil to Ford. So all of their runaround scrap stays within their facility and is not, does not count towards the carbon intensity. It's just considered primary aluminum. And then when that coil makes it to Ford, we have some stamping scrap which leaves the system and will come back later. And then so we count so that closed loop lowers the carbon intensity of the stamp part, because we're looking at the stamp part. Mm-hmm. So
just a quick question.
It's complicated. Might need some diagrams and maybe 30 more minutes to walk through the
and a chalkboard and some chalk to go through it. Yeah. So just a quick question I wanted to hit on before everybody runs out of here. We didn't hit on EVs, but typically the recyclers understand the life cycle of a vehicle when it starts and when it gets back to your yard, etc. Because of the EVs and the lightweight, is it going to take longer? Is that going to change the dichotomy for the recycling industry? How does that?
Yeah, as far as how aluminum plays into the EVs, So, so EVs, as you all know, maybe the adoption rate has kind of plateaued, but it's still Ford is interested in it as a alternative powertrain, and then the question is how much aluminum content goes into a battery electric vehicle. And it's aluminum plays a role because it will increase range, and then through lightweighting. And then I guess looking at the future, how much aluminum will be used in future EVs, I don't know. And it depends on what happens to the battery technology. So the big thing in batteries is the energy density. Right now it's quite low, so you need big batteries to move vehicles. And to increase range, you look at things like lightweighting. So aluminum is an example, or high strength steels that are down gauge is an example. And then it'll depend on how the battery technology progresses. So as that energy density increases, you could end up with a smaller battery, and then it might make more sense to use heavier steel or less expensive steel instead of lightweighting.
We have time for one more?
Yeah.
So, Gary, I just wanted to circle back to John's question about, how much do you forecast or anticipate aluminum increase in automotive production, right? Because I know that Daniel can't comment on it, and but you guys have made the investments, right? Like the rolling mills. So at least, maybe if it's not your forecast, or just can you, since you're investing in automotive sheet, right? What do y'all forecast as the increased use of aluminum in cars compared to steel? If you could just shed some light on what you guys are kind of betting on, I guess.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I'll just pull I don't know that I have that off the top of my head number, but it is a number that we do have that is available. As you look at the forward forecasts that we've made, we've projected how much of our portfolio is going to grow in each market. It's significant, but I can't give you the.
Is UBC's the largest fraction of that?
In terms of the growth?
Yeah.
It depends on the plant. That's a good question. I don't know. Let's find out. We'll get back to you.
All right, that's it for the questions. Just one last question for me to you, and then I think we're done for today. But just rolling back to the future. So the next 10 years, where do you see Novelis and more importantly, the recycled industry being more part of what you do? I know right now, obviously with the tariffs, primary aluminum is too expensive, so it seems a bit trendy at the moment. But it's helped the recycled industry, and hopefully you can focus more on that. Just let us know, your 10-year view on where we stand with that.
From my standpoint, in 10 years, I hope to be happily retired. However, between now and then, noted. Yeah. Call HR, right? I think between now and then, where I see Novelis is in many ways exactly where we are today, building relationships, continuing to build on the relationships that we have with ReMA members to provide the product that we need. All these plants that we've got have, as your bar chart showed, an increasing amount of recycled content that's critical. Vesper is not going to happen without this room, without us purchasing it, without the technology being developed, and without the folks in this room, providing the product. That's where I see it in the next 10 years. And in many ways, that looks a lot like where we are today, right? Because that's how we got to where we are. We don't buy the most amount of scrap by accident. We need all of you to get there.
Very well said. Well, thank you guys. Oh,
I just have one thing.
Gabrielle, I got one comment over here. Neil, you brought out the point that you need the help from Ford and Novelis about our industry because we are under attack. I'm John Sacco. I've produced 2 series of Repurpose on the steel industry. In a couple of weeks, we're releasing recycled aluminum driving the U.S. auto industry, where we filmed. Sorry, it wasn't Ford. It was your competitor. But how recycled aluminum, without it, the U.S. auto industry does not exist. And it's a in-depth. Toyota is the featured auto manufacturer in it. And I think it's a good tool to help us all fight regulatory burdens and to educate our policymakers on what we do. And, without this room supplying you, Novelis, Ford would not have aluminum to build an automobile in the United States. So, bingo. It's part of what we do. We've got to continue to spread the message. Neil, thanks for bringing that up.
Yep.
I also want to add to that, too, is to go to your chapter meetings. I went to the Michigan chapter meeting about a month ago, and it was a very quiet meeting, but it shouldn't be. Your voices should be heard, and really you should attend them because it'll be an integral part of what's going on here. Again, thank you very much.
Yeah,
you guys want to add one final thing?
No, it's good. Thank you.
You guys good?
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.